Alright, so here we go for part two. Again, we just said that, yes, the number can go up, and no, the number cannot go up. Now we look for the terms of their House of Representatives. They serve for 2 years. When you look at disadvantages and advantages to the fact that these people only serve for 2 years, one advantage to a 2-year term, somebody usually serving for only 2 years, is that if they do something wrong, the American people will have at least that long of a memory and be able to have them removed from office through the voting booth. We will remember things, and because they know we will remember things in only 2 years, they will be responsive to us. And if they are responsive to the Americans they represent, I guess that we would have to put that down on the side of an advantage, and that they are listening to the American people in the form of republic that we have. So the advantages of a term that's short is that they will listen to the American people. They do like their jobs. They do like getting reelected. They will listen to what we want them to do. Now, the disadvantage of a 2-year terms is even more so is the media gets more expensive and more expensive and more expensive. Is the fact that as soon as you're finished with the 2-year term, you might take a day off or something like that, and the next day you're already back at the business of running again for a 2-year term, and the amount of money that costs to do so. So you're back into raising money, visiting places that really you may not be in the best interest of the people you're representing, because you're visiting people to raise money or to do this or do that or this political advantageous act, and not what you were elected to do, which was to solve problems. And so this is a pretty distinctive disadvantage of the idea that a big part of their term is used doing nothing more than setting up, working hard, raising money to run for the next. There are no term limits either in the for Congress. I think we could imagine that in my lifetime, and probably yours, there are not going to be any, because the term limits would have to be proposed and passed by the actual people themselves in Congress, who don't want them because they like their jobs considerably, which is why we have so many old guys up there. But if we were ever to get to that fantasy land, let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages there might be to that. The advantages to no term limits, in other words, just letting people run forever, would be that you are making sure that you held on to your talent. In other words, if you had term limits for everybody, you would be losing good people. I mean, if you wanted to take an analogy of teachers at Bishop Lynch, and we had term limits, you'd be losing a fair amount of teachers that you would probably like for them to go, and probably need to go, and maybe aren't the best, and we need new blood, and blah, 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 blah. But we will be losing a few teachers that are what we're all about, that make our school in many ways, and would hurt us considerably. So one advantage to no term limits is that you don't lose good people. The disadvantage of no term limits, I think, that is more easily accepted by most people, in that we would get new blood into it. The dinosaurs that are up there that seem to act in the same old way, often acting self-interest in self-interest, or acting out of party politics, or acting out of the desire to get reelected, or this or that, or this or that just continues to amaze and disgust many of us. Perhaps we could get that moved down the road with new blood. We'll see here later in this lecture that once you're in, it is very difficult to be defeated when you're the incumbent, because there are things that you can do, mainly with purse strings, to make sure that the people back home like you. And if the people back home like you, you'll get elected. And so it's going to be a little bit insidious here, because the people that are already in power can buy you, I don't mean it overtly, but buy you in sort of in a sneaky sort of fashion to get you to like them. It's sort of interesting that when they do polls out of, I think the Congress right now, the approval rate of Congress is at about 7%, unbelievably low. But when they ask people about their congressman, it goes way, way up. The problem is not with our congressmen. The problem is always with the other 434 of them. Now we know that is a intellectual quagmire, and a misnomer, and a possibility, and a dangerous one, because we're locked in and boxed in to an impracticality that it's going to be hard to bust out of, and yet that is where we find ourselves. So there you go, what I'm talking about with the political reality, making, I doubt it will ever have term limits again, because they would have to actually impose the term limits on themselves. And you hear very, very little, even in DC, you hear them, people bringing up things that might be good or bad ideas, but at least they raise them, and you hear somebody making a speech or talking about them, or somewhere you can go find an article or something printed, but don't find a lot of term limit advancement of term limit possibilities, and nowhere in the literature or in the public record of those guys up there. Nobody seems to be very much in favor of it, and I think we can understand why. Now, what happens is, we just talked a minute ago, the 435 number cannot go up. But what can happen is the 435 people, the way they're distributed, can be changed around. Okay, so in other words, some states could gain seats, and some states could lose seats through the years. So the 435 does not go up the way the pie is divvied up does. So that happens every 10 years when there's a census in this country, where they go to try and count everybody who lives in each state. A very, very difficult task, fraught with political intrigue too, because each side is always accusing the other side of trying to undercount the opposition, or overcount theirs, because of the money and the influence that's involved, if there are more of your type of constituent. So we have a census every 2 years. It takes about a year to add all that up, and then we find out how many people live in every state in America, and we begin to look at the 435 people, and we begin to reapportion it. And we redistribute these seats in each state. Some states, therefore, are going to gain, and some states, therefore, are going to naturally lose. Can't be any other way. If one gains, one has to lose. Now, on the way up, if I was in class, I would be asking you maybe giving you a post point, if you could tell me which states might be on the way up, and it would take a couple minutes, but before long people would understand what the trend was, and they'd be shouting out the right answers, because we're talking about the states in the Sun Belt, all the way across from Florida to California, basically, including Texas and Georgia and New Mexico and Arizona. The ones that ring, including the Bible Belt, but not just the Bible Belt, because once you get past Texas, you're no longer in the Bible Belt, but the Sun Belt. For the last about 40 years now, those states have been on the rise. When we want to talk about trends and demographics, we need to be careful that you don't just take like a one election cycle, or really, quite honestly, even one 10-year cycle, and say that is a trend just because a state gained some population in one 10-year period. It takes more than that. And the Census Department, demographers and geographers tend to want to look at least 30 years probably before they begin to be talking about large trends, and so it is with political demographics here. When you're looking at states that for 30 years now, 3 cycles have been gaining and other states have been losing, we see trends that are very, very definite. And the Sun Belt are the ones that have been on the rise and going up. Well, that means some have had to go down, because those that go up have to have a corresponding and their action on the other way going down. It's almost like physics. I guess it's as close as political science can get to actual science here. What goes up must come down. So which states do you think that might be on the way down? I wait for you to think of them, or shout them out, or throw them at the screen, or cut them out on little pieces of paper and make paper airplanes out of them, and throw them at the screen or something like that, and see if we can't come up with some in here where we find them. What is sometimes affectionately called the Rust Belt. Now, the Rust Belt is in the northeastern and midwestern United States, the upper Midwest part of the United States. So basically from Massachusetts, say, or New York, across to Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois, and then all the way back across east as it picks back up, including my home state of Pennsylvania. And so you've got this wide swath called the Rust Belt, meaning because that part of the country was largely dependent on manufacturing, heavy industrial manufacturing, including steel mills. And of course, you know that if you have a piece of steel or something, metal, and it isn't polished or ever used, it turns rusty, eh? And comes the cute little term of the Rust Belt, from the idea, and the very real idea, if you go back east to not so much the big cities like Pittsburgh and New York City and those, but small towns, mid-sized towns like where I'm from in Erie, Pennsylvania, where there's still a lot of shut down steel mills that are literally rusting away right in front of you, and you can see that. And Alabet, the appropriate name, the Rust Belt. So for the last 30 years, we've seen political power in the House of Representatives following these demographic patterns from the north to the south, generally, more specifically from the Sun Belt, from the Rust Belt. And that settled down this last cycle, but it's still continuing, so that we'll have to see if it continues another 10 years, and my suspicion it probably is, even if it will slow down. Now, I just mentioned that there's 435 people in the House of Representatives. Each one of them has their own district, and each district has certain rules that you must follow when you go to be elected. So you can't just, by happenstance, just start doing things left and right about these, the way you go and get your votes and who can vote for you and where your lines are and things like that. So there are actually geographic lines that are inside states. Somebody has to sit down and draw up the line of where your district is. Now, if you're in a state, say like Wyoming, that only has one district, it only has one congressman, then the entire state is a district. But if you have a state that has two districts, then somebody has to actually draw the lines out so that we know in that state which people live in what district and can vote for one person and which live in the other. In Texas, we have 36 districts, so our state is divided up by 36 geographical entities. Each person has to know where they live and in which district that is, and to know who their district person is that they can vote for. Okay. So that's drawn up by the state legislatures after they get the census results. Highly political, highly volatile, highly difficult to do, and gets very, very ugly. So here's some of the rules for the districts. The first one is actually, I guess, a non-rule. You don't have to live in the district. You can actually live in Waco and represent a district in Dallas if you can get elected, which might be difficult to do. You don't have to live in the district. So when we asked why the framers didn't require that, you would think they would want people who live in the district to be the persons that are representing the district, right? Doesn't that make sense? And weren't the framers the enlightened men who only did things that made sense? And I suppose in the 21st century world, and we think about it, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, the reason is that, especially some states like South Carolina and certain parts of eastern Pennsylvania and whatnot, and the framers were concerned that there actually literally would be parts of the state in which there were no enlightened men from which to choose from. In other words, they certainly expected enlightened men to be running Congress, right? As we've talked about many, many, many times, they expected the power structure to be enlightened men, and elected by enlightened men. Well, what happens if you're in some backwater part of South Carolina and just aren't any enlightened men left who live there? As strange as it seems today in this time of economic and political and educational diversity and egalitarianism, there was times like that. And so they set it up so that they needed to bring some guy in from the other end of the state to run a backwater district in South Carolina or North Carolina or Virginia or something like that. That's exactly what they would do. And that person could get elected and would get elected and would represent that district and not only not live there, often not even visit there. The realities of today are quite different, and although you could still do this, to be elected would be very, very difficult. I know if I was running against any of you for this district in the Congress, and you didn't live in this district, every single one of my commercials would start with that and end with that, and probably have it in the middle as well, as how can this person represent you when he doesn't live with you and doesn't know your problems and doesn't know your anxieties and doesn't know your potholes on your streets, and so that would be very, very difficult to do, but it's still in the books and it's still possible. Lastly, the lines must be continuous. In other words, they can't jump around. You can't have a line that starts here in Dallas County and then picks up and then goes way, way down to the valley to pick up the last part of it, of the amount of people in there. The lines have to be touching with each other at all times. On to